Hey, my beautiful listeners, we are back with season 3 of The Beautiful Side of Grief, and I'm your host, Helen Morris. My incredible guests continue to share their own personal stories of grief in so many different forms and how they have managed to find the positives and beauty from their experiences. And I hope by listening to these honest, heartfelt accounts, you can find the tips, insights, resources, and strategies you need for where you're at here and now. And maybe one day even find a beautiful side to your grief like I have. So share away, as I would love this podcast to reach as many who need to hear it as possible. Don't forget to check out the episode notes as well for more information and links. Plus the energy healing I do that changed my life forever. And this season, I'd also love to share the affirmations and meditations I'm working on, so stay tuned for those. Right now, though, my thanks for listening, and let's check out who this week's guest is. What is the hidden grief in your life? You may not even be aware that you have such a thing. So I'm excited to have Katie Rossler as my guest today to take a deep dive into this. Katie is an expat, not from New Zealand, but from the US. She's also a wife, a mum of 3, and loves to be by the water to relax. She's also an author, transformative grief guide, and licensed counselor with 13 years of experience helping individuals, couples, and families. Last month, she released her book, The New Face of Grief. She wrote this book because she is on a mission to help people understand that now is the time to change how we understand grief and to learn how to identify and heal hidden grief in our lives that, when ignored, can lead to addiction, disconnection from loved ones, and increased stress. So if that sounds a little bit like you, I'm glad you are tuned in to listen to this. So we're going to discuss it from all different angles. And Katie also has a great resource for you that we're going to take a look at as well. So I hope you're as excited as I am to take a fresh look at grief from this perspective. Thanks for listening. And my wish is that your own journey with grief be one that is filled with love, hope, and happiness. So Katie, a very warm welcome from the other side of the world. Talking to you from Munich, Germany today. So it's great to have you looking at grief that breaks the mold of what we probably know grief to be. So welcome.
Yes, thank you very much, Helen. I'm looking forward to our talk today.
So I thought we'd just jump right in to understand why you believe we only have 2 choices when we face challenges in our life.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to the challenges we face, we have been conditioned to look at them as that victim mindset or, okay, I can do this. I can get through it. And I would say more people than not look at it as the victim mindset, the challenge. There's something, this is being done to me. What have I done to deserve this? We hear it when people even say, oh, but she's such a great person. I can't believe all these things are happening to her. And you're like, it's just life. Life has got positives and negatives. And what occurs is we go about life with changes and things we need to adapt to and losses and including death. And all of that has grief attached to it.
Yeah.
And we don't see it as grief because we assume grief is just linked to death, which is grief is a response to death. But for me, the definition of grief needs to change. I look at it as an emotional response to how we thought life should go or would go. And how we start to get to a point of acceptance of how life actually is.
That's really good. I think, like you say, if you're not actually aware of it, you think that all these things are happening to you from the outside. And yes, they are. But what we have is the key inside to help unlock all of that. And I think that's what you're saying, right?
Yes. Yeah. On the inside, we have the mindset and that willpower to experience and see it differently. And once you start to see that life's positives and negatives, people like to say good or bad, but I say positives and negatives, things that add to our life, things that take away, are all part of growth, then you aren't so afraid of or negatively impacted when there are things you don't enjoy or don't like happening in your life. And you start to take more more control over handling what's happening to you and how you're
What
going
do
to
you,
experience it.
sorry, Katie, what do you think it is that keeps people stuck?
I believe we've been conditioned to
Mhm.
be this way since childhood. So if you think about it, when we were children, if something happened to us, it was either tough it up, move on,
Mhm.
or let's distract you from feeling or thinking what it is you're having. So I use the example of children today, and living in Germany, gummy bears are like the thing. Everybody gives children gummy bears or chocolate. And if a child has an injury, it's immediately, let me give you food, let me give you my phone to watch something to change your mind. It's not, let me allow you to sit with this pain. And this is just a physical example. Let me allow you to sit with this pain. Let me teach you how to, take deep breaths. Let's rub the area. Let's go clean it and things. Instead, it's distract and avoid, escape, distract, avoid, escape. And I think back to my childhood, and my parents were doing the best that they knew because of how they were parented, but it was the same. It was distract, avoid, escape. And I know that that impacted my ability to really believe in myself when challenges came. I thought, oh, I've had such a horrible day. I deserve to go eat this. I deserve to go buy this. I deserve to go do this. Instead of, I've had such a challenging day, let me do some good self-care things to really re-nurture my soul, rest. So many of us will stay up late at night and talk about how tired we are in life instead of thinking self-care is, let me go to bed early. And I'm horrible at that, even still, knowing that we do this because avoid, escape. It's like, don't really do the things that actually help. We do the things that seem like they help in the moment.
Gosh, those are such good points. And I can completely see that. And yeah, it's conditioning. So we just do on automatic what we think is the right thing to do. And so I know from my own childhood, I grew up on farms and we used to just disappear. So we'd get ourselves into huge scrapes and then we would always weigh up whether we said anything or not if we hurt ourselves, because we knew that we were going to get this horrible red stingy stuff put on our scratches or scrapes
Right.
and it really stung. So we'd go, is this bad enough? and but what I grew up is hugely resilient. Like I learned just to pick myself up and carry on, but I avoided in other ways. But certainly I knew how to just keep carrying on. So yeah, it's good to understand that. So, what is it that made you decide to become a transformative grief guide? Because I know you had loads of stuff happening in your life, and I guess it all weighed in and on that decision, did it?
Yeah. So into the end of 2018, I lost my mom suddenly. And then the following year, I had back to back miscarriages. And it was one of those, like, just, I describe it as like the ocean, just a wave hitting you and a wave hitting you, and a wave hitting you.
Yeah.
And you just keep going, like, I'm trying to stand up and you won't even allow me to stand up, life. Like, what's going on? When I really started doing my own grief healing work and facing what I was feeling, and I was already a mom to two girls. So I knew if I hid this and I tried to avoid it, I was just going to affect how they dealt with great grief. And I was going to affect how I was a mom and a partner to my husband. So I was really doing the work. And by doing that, I noticed I had experienced grief throughout my life. Like when my parents divorced, I remember feeling the same type of emptiness and like, whoa, this isn't how I thought life was. And we moved every 2 to 3 years as a military family and uprooted everything, new friends, new school. And so this feeling of I don't belong and I don't know where I am. And, it was all different perspectives of it, but it was that same feeling of grief each time. And it took those losses for me to see, oh, wow, I've gone through this throughout my life. And then if I think about my clients, they've all gone through grief throughout their life. It's actually quite a normal, natural part of life, of what we go through. But because we associate it just with death, we tell ourselves, well, nobody died. When something bad happens and we feel this emptiness and this grief. So going through that and just realizing, wow, we go through this throughout our lives. This is normal. How do we start to transform this into what it's supposed to be, a tool for growth? And that is when I really stepped into, in a sense, I call it stepped into my power and my abilities of not just talk therapy, but the spiritual side and the transformative side of grief, and helping people to really sit with and remind them that your brain is not usually where grief is stored. Your body is where it's stored. That's why we feel it in so many different ways. And helping them to connect, because we like to disconnect. I always think there's a box in our head and we disconnect it from the rest of our body. And so once I started doing that, I just realized, a grief guide or a grief counselor doesn't even begin to explain it. Is really, there's this transformative piece. And so that's where the title Transformative Grief Guide came from. It was just saying, it doesn't have to look this way. It doesn't have to feel like suffering. There's a different way to go about it.
And I know that it's often when people face something hugely pivotal like you did with the loss of your mum, which I'm so sorry about, and those miscarriages, they take or have a huge impact on you emotionally, mentally, and physically. And often it's when we get to those points, we start thinking. But what we want to do is actually not wait until those come into our life and actually start dealing with it beforehand. So let's take a look at the different types of grief you can deal with. Let's name them, because I'm sure people are not even aware of some of the types of grief that we can be experiencing.
Right. Well, let's get into what can cause it. So I mentioned my parents' divorce. So divorce, separation, breakup in a relationship.
Yes.
Boundaries with family members. I'm spending time with this person actually makes me feel worse, even if it's somebody really close to us, maybe a parent or a sibling. Friends, when we need to create boundaries with friends or end a friendship and decide this is not a friendship that helps us any further. When we find out a health diagnosis that's going to impact the rest of our lives, or even a shorter term, not as long, but it does impact our life, or that of a family member who finds out of that health condition as well. And it can be something like, I have friends with type 1 diabetes, and they will talk about like, your life is just different. And it's something that if you don't grieve and you don't allow yourself to feel, that it stays with you and it comes out in unhealthy ways at times. We can also experience this just moving, the loss of a home or a job, especially if it's quite sudden. I've had a woman share with me, well, I don't understand how somebody, losing a home or a job would be the same as me, losing this family member. And I said, well, if that's the home you grew up in your whole life and it was burning down in front of you, don't you think that would have quite an impact on your heart and your mind as losing a person? This is where memories were. This is a place that, you stored so much of your life in. So we like to compare. And in reality, if we put ourselves in the shoes of those people who experience those things, and maybe we have as well, we see they can have such an impact as well. Nowadays, it's more and more prevalent of people coming out and having an identity shift that other people didn't realize. And that can impact the family members, and it can also impact the person who's finally coming out and saying, no, this is who I am. And I have to deal with the grief of others not accepting me and being comfortable with who I am. There's the grief of parenthood. If we're honest, there's this isn't what I thought it would be like. This isn't, or, oh, wow, I really had to let go of more of my old self than I thought that I would have to. Nobody told me those things, That comes with grief. When we parent, maybe like we were parented and we didn't want to do that. Like, why am I doing this? That can cause grief because we have that inner child work to do, letting go of how we were parented, our attachment issues as well. So as you see, none of this relates to death, but we're still, I can keep going. Let's talk about midlife. I call it transition.
Yes.
Just like Christ did.
Let's bring out as many examples as we can, because I really would love for people to identify, hey, that's me you're talking about.
Yeah. So a midlife crisis, or like I said, I like to call it transition. My life is not where I thought I would be by now. This isn't what it was supposed to be like. I feel like I've just coasted and this is where I've gotten. This is not anything like, what I dreamed of having. This is where I was supposed to be my career and I'm not even there. all of that. That's why those people end up like, we see it in Hollywood. They buy the sports car and they go off and find a new partner. But in reality, it's grief. It's a response to grief. This overwhelming panic of, how do I get that back? I can't. This isn't how it should go, or I thought it would go. So we get overwhelmed. Empty nesters. As soon as the kids are gone, you're left there with your home, and maybe it's with your partner and you guys haven't looked at your relationship in a long time. You have that grief there too. This experience of, wait, it's quiet. I'm left with myself. Things like last year and currently, a pandemic, when the world has changed, whether it be because of war, because of health, because of major political events happening in your country, that can all cause grief as well. All of this is shifting the world as you experienced it and understood it.
Yeah.
Suicide in a community, suicide, a shooting, things like that can impact a whole community. And people will think, well, it wasn't my child who died, or I didn't know them, but you could still grieve. Oh my goodness, you can, especially if you're very empathic, you're going to grieve. You're going to feel them. You're going to feel what they're going through. So it's miscarriage, pet loss. And we can talk about deaths as well, but the deaths people don't usually think about, like, well, it was just a pet. But for some, that pet is their baby as well. That's their child. And so that creates the same level of grief. So it's so complex and yet so simple that there's so much in our lives that causes grief, and it's not bad. It's all there to help us to heal and grow into a greater version of ourselves.
Something I was thinking of while you were speaking as well is it's like sometimes, we go along this whole trajectory of what our life should look like. We go to university, we get the degree, we go into the job and we're in this job and we find that we don't like it at all. Yet we've done all this other groundwork, to get there. And there's a whole lot of guilt and emotions mixed in with that. But that's not your passion. That's not your love. And so that's another form of grief as well, isn't it?
Completely. And I think even just the whole process of you go to university and you're by yourself, or that first time you move out and live on your own, there can be that feeling of, I'm alone and there's nobody here. It can be exciting and exhilarating and also scary, and then cause some overwhelm and some grief in it too.
Yeah. Oh, those are fantastic examples. And you often hear in like grief circles and forums that the way to deal with grief, like allow people to sit with it and deal with it in their own way and that. But quite often that can take quite a long time. And some people sit with their grief for years. And look, I'm not sitting in judgment of that at all, what's right for that person. But it doesn't always have to be that way, does it? You can actually move through grief, whether it's a physical loss of somebody that you're grieving, a pet or something, or all those other examples we've talked about. Take us through that.
Yeah. So what I find is most people think that it's this, especially if it's a death, it's the first year and then you're fine after that. Just the first year is that bad. And I'm into the third year of the loss of my mom. So anniversaries still hurt.
Yeah.
And the loss is still real, but it's integrated into me. It doesn't feel like this thing that's so scary that I want to avoid and get away from. It's just when something reminds me of her and I start to tear up, I just allow it to happen versus oh no, I don't want to feel this right now. Let me get this away. It's no, this is just part of me. And my children, they talk about her and they bring her up and it's okay. Or if there's times where I see we do have a third daughter now and I think, what if those two others had made it and we wouldn't have her? Oh, wow. And I think about the blessing of having her, but then what would have been like? And so I process that grief and I process the way life works out. And so it's not that grief is this weight on your shoulders anymore. It's kind of just it's woven into the way you think and feel. It's a natural part of you. So when we were talking about the health issues or moving or loss of a job or things like that, these are things that you'll feel them at different times in your life come back, and reminders and memories, or with the physical conditions, you'll every day be living with it. And if we keep running from this feeling of, I need to grieve and sit with that this isn't what I wanted for my life, and start to accept how it is, when you run from it, then you find yourself being more reactive, more triggered by other people or situations. You find yourself feeling really stressed and overwhelmed. You feed into those addictions. So if you start to see yourself going down that path, or hey, you know what, that's actually what I've been struggling with, that's for me the clear signs that like grief work is well overdue. And grief work can be as simple as 15 minutes a day of sitting with silence, closing your eyes and feeling into your body and just saying, where are you today, grief? What is it I need to work on? And free writing whatever comes up. Or it can be as simple as go for a walk or a run with the intention of working on what it is you're storing inside your body that needs to be released. There's so many different ways to do this. This is why art and music and different things are created out of grief or anger and sadness and fear. All of these things, it's actually all in from grief. So we assume it's this, well, I need to go to therapy and just talk for hours and hours, and it's going to take me months and years. And talk therapy is wonderful. Again, 13 years of as a therapist, but it isn't like that. And if you find you've been with the same therapist for years and on the same subject, you're not healing. You're not working through it. Now, if you're able to talk about it from a very healthy point of view, great. But if you're still suffering and struggling, and there's this whole mindset piece to it, and there's this whole mind-body connection that's not happening. And that's for me why I went from just therapy of talk therapy to integrating. Let's combine the two and help people to understand their bodies hold so much, and their bodies can let go of so much if they allow it to as well. So if you're going, okay, I see it, Helen and Katie, I've got hidden grief. I know this. Where do I begin? I tell all of my clients, and my first session with them is always, let's sit down and create your grief timeline. Let's look at the whole lifespan like a movie, and let's see what are the events that have happened that have built up. Like you said, they all builds up that you still hold on to. What are those major events? And then what are the minor events? Like on the school bus being picked on by the kids, or that teacher making fun of you in front of everybody, or your parent not playing a board game with you, and you remember that moment when they didn't. Those things all add up. And one of my giftings is to look at people's lifespan and go, do you notice the theme of abandonment? Or do you notice the theme of a fear of failure constantly? I'm able to see this thread, and they go like, oh my gosh, I didn't yeah. And I said, that's what the grief work is here to teach you. It's not that it's going to stop making people, leave you, or their deaths will still happen. That's part of life, or change will occur, but you will have those things occur, and it will not hurt that wounding that's afraid of being abandoned or rejected, or afraid of failing. And that's why everybody leaves. It's a beautiful gift to be able to give clients, where I get to look at that whole lifespan and go, hey, here's some themes I'm noticing. How about we let those go? How about we release those? And then we decondition the false beliefs around them. And so you can work with somebody to do things like that, or you can start to okay, let me really look at myself and my life in such an objective consultant kind of way. Let me step back. And you'll probably start to see those things as well. It can always help to work with somebody. Of course, I love what I do, but often people are afraid of it. People are, I don't know if I want to talk to somebody.
Yeah, it's also hard to be objective sometimes about yourself, because what you do is you naturally avoid the things that are going to perhaps trigger you, so you don't actually go into it. Whereas somebody else is looking at it, they will just go straight there, and they will tell it what like it is, and you go, yeah, okay. So sometimes that's where you need that person in on the equation. You may do a great job yourself, but just having somebody coming from a totally different perspective, where they've got nothing vested in, the journey,
right,
except to help you, can be really, really, clarifying for you of where you need to go, what you need to look at. The other thing I want to just sidetrack and get into is when you're reactive, when you've got all this grief piling up, like I know for you, like you shifted to a new country and you had these two youngsters. And so you were having that grief of motherhood as well as shifting and that, and then you had the loss of your mum and all that. So what you had was compounding grief. What are the sorts of things that people can recognize when they're being reactive and triggered? Because again, people just think sometimes they have an anger problem. They've always had this anger problem, and that's just the way I'm made. But actually, no, it's not. And so can you have a chat to us about that?
Yeah, I think, like you said, if somebody goes, I've always been this way, I'm just really reactive. I think there's still that little voice inside of us that's like, I don't really want to be like this. I don't want to blow up at every time someone says this to me or every holiday. I don't want to be like this. So for me, the telltale signs are typically when it gets so bad that people don't want to be around you, that people start to kind of avoid you, or you find it's impacting your sleep, your ability to just function in everyday life, and also the relationships. When you notice that you're argumentative with lots of people and you feel that kind of, this doesn't feel right. Like something's not correct about how I'm acting. And we tend to feel guilt or shame. And then we'll try to avoid those. Those are the signs for me. When people start to say that, I just blow up at people a lot. I get angry at this. I'm really, I would say, sensitive, or triggered by when people bring up this topic. Then that's a good sign. The other signs that I'm especially I find with parents is I just feel really overwhelmed. I don't know where the time is going. I just, at the end of the day, I disconnect, or even during the day, I'm on my phone. I disconnect from my kids. I don't really want to be present with them. Those to me are the signs of, yes, exhaustion, but also there is something there that we're hitting up against. And instead of feeling it, we're numbing out. And we're going, I don't want to feel this, so I'm going to feel busy on my phone. I'm going to go and take care of these other projects that really don't make my life easier or better. I had a community, or still have a community of moms, but I was doing a lot of work with them for a while there, and we talked about what real self-care looks like. And when we're struggling with our identity as moms and we're grieving the old, we will do the self-care that marketing and salespeople would like us to, which is buy the food, shop at this, do these kinds of things. And real self-care means habit changes and meal planning so that for the rest of the week, we're not trying to figure it out last minute, and preparing everything the night before so that in the morning, we're not running around screaming at everybody. But it's not fun stuff. It doesn't feel like self-care. We're not painting our nails and sitting in a bubble bath, but it is self-care because it's simplifying and making our lives easier and better. And that's what I find with grief work. It doesn't always feel good. It doesn't always make us go, oh yeah, I just feel so well rested after all that grief work. It can be really tough, and changing your thought process on things and, accepting how you feel about stuff can be very overwhelming and upsetting in its own way. But when you do it in a container of support, then you start to see this is so worth it, because each time it becomes easier and I start to feel more empowered in myself and more, aligned. And I feel like I'm not as upset at people when they bring up certain topics. It doesn't hurt my feelings as much. And so that piece can be really powerful. So if you're finding you're doing a lot of self-care that is what others would tell you self-care is versus really what makes your life healthier, happier, more simple, then those are signs as well that you're avoiding something. And more than likely, I usually say it's always grief, but more than likely it is grief.
Let's talk about the support aspect of this, because you brought up the example just before about people perhaps going to a counselor or a therapist and, having been there, going there for several years or months or whatever it may be, but still feeling like they're no further ahead. What I feel sometimes is key, and particularly for me, is that connection with that person, that relationship with that person I'm talking to. Because what I find is that I'm not going to give up any information unless I feel safe and secure. And I think people need to understand that it's okay to shop around until you find that person. Correct?
Yes, 100%. I think about there was a time when you had to go to the doctor in the neighborhood or in that town because that's the only doctor. You had to go to the living in Europe, you had to go to the butcher or whatever because that's the only butcher in the area. You had to go and we live in a time where there's so many people in their profession. So you can shop around, just like not every person is someone you like, friend wise, and things like that. So it's going to be the same with a therapist or a counselor or psychologist or psychiatrist or even regular doctor. You get the choice to shop around. Now, some with health insurance that can change some things, but there really are many who are out there who have different styles of therapy, different ways that they address topics. I'll be honest, not everybody's really trained how to work in grief. Just because they're a therapist doesn't mean, they might go, well, yeah, but, they're a therapist and they learned all these skills. And maybe there's a counselor going, well, no, yes, we all are. Actually, we're not. If we think about it, we're not. It's just the same as many are not trained in trauma. Trauma is very specific. And so there are particular things where it's good to have somebody who either through life experiences and through their own conceptualization have that ability to work with you or through their training, their education. So yes, shop around. And the one thing I always hear is I'm so tired of having to hear my story, or tell my story over and over. So that first session, this is what I suggest. And you'll probably surprise the counselor or therapist if you do this, but if you just go to the therapist, tell me a little bit about yourself and what type of therapy you do. And as you hear them talk about it, if they go, well, I'm cognitive behavioral therapy and I use, you might even go, can you explain what that means to me? Like a narrative therapist, you might go, well, what does narrative therapy mean? And if they can't explain it to you in a way that you understand, you probably don't want to work with them. You want to have somebody who's able to explain concepts to you in a way that you get it. And you might go, what are some things you do to take care of yourself in the day-to-day? What are your self-care routines? Or what are the ways that you help your mental health? You want somebody who's walking what they talk. You want somebody who's practicing that. And that's my biggest, I know social media isn't always the best, like, hey, look at me. But I put it I'm journaling and I'm like, here's me journaling. Cause I'm literally like, I'm journaling right now and I want to show people, take 10 minutes and journal or stop and have a cup of tea and like take a moment and breathe it in. Go for that walk. Even if you've got your kids all running around next to you, like go out and get some sunlight, like things like that. You want to hear from your person you decide to work with that they're doing activities to take care of their mental health too. How are they dealing with their grief healing journey? Because we all have grief. And it's not that this is how you shop around though. You can still share your story. You can go, I have had many events happen. I've had losses. And in particular, I need to work on my grief around blah, blah, blah. But today it's important for me to know if I'm going to be comfortable with you. And so I want to learn more about you. I've never had a client do that with me. But honestly, if they did, I would be like, I want to work with you because you take it serious. You're going to do your homework because you're making sure I'm the right person. So be comfortable taking the reins in that first session. We always think we have to sit back and like, let me just tell you my life story. And when I was a child, this happened. Of course, nobody wants to go to like 5 different people and tell that same story.
And actually, that's just reinforcing everything, back into your own narrative instead of being able to actually put it to the side. So, yes, I can see why people are so reluctant to do that. And I so get that too. And it's about connection. It's about who makes you feel energized, who makes you inspired to make those changes within yourself, because that's a big thing. You've been like that for so many years. Who is going to inspire you to actually help you take those next steps? to actually leave that behind. I think that's so important. Though that what you just said was a gold nugget for sure, because I think it's so very, very important. This is our journey, and we have a right to be choosing the person who is the best fit for ourselves.
Completely. And in today's times, we can usually find therapists, counselors, guides, coaches online. We can see what content they're putting out there, and we can see if we align with it already before we even get into their office. And if they don't have social media or things like that, that's okay. But you're allowed to search for the person online and to see what you find and make sure it's something you go, okay, like I have videos on YouTube, I have things on Instagram, I have things on Facebook and different places so that people can find me and go, hey, I like what she talks about. Or you know what? No, she's not the right fit for me. That's okay. But I want people to know up front, how do I talk about things? How do I share my story? What am I doing to work on my mental health as well? And then they can decide, you know what, that inspires me and I want to work alongside her. Or it inspires me, maybe I'll go buy her book, but I don't really want to work with her. There's different ways we can work in quotations with somebody. And it doesn't always have to be one-on-one.
Oh, so great. So let's talk about what prompted you to write your book, The New Face of Grief, because I know you've had so many experiences yourself, but we often think about writing a book. Many of us may have had those thoughts, but there's a difference between actually thinking about it and knuckling down and doing all the hard work and actually putting it on paper to be something that can be published. So what's your story around that?
Yeah, well, you're right. Since high school, my husband's like, ever since I've known you, you've wanted to write a book. But since high school, I've wanted to write a book. It was always a dream of mine, but I always pictured it would be a book with my mom and my grandmother. And it'd be a 3-generational book of like different topics that we as women go through and our perspectives at these different generations. And when my mom died, one of the thoughts I had, I remember that first month, was, we're never going to get to write that book. And I just thought, oh, that dream is gone. And I had already started playing around with some other book ideas just in my profession and with motherhood and things. And then we came to 2020 and I started the year going, prior to everything happening, I really want this year to be, I want to remove urgency from my life. I want less go, 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 less stress. Like I really just want to be more present. And then I apologized to all my friends and family when everything happened and we were all in lockdown. I was like, I'm sorry, guys. I told the universe and God that I really wanted to remove urgency and have way less in my life. And clearly it worked out that we're all at home all the time. I don't need to be urgently going anywhere. But during that time, I grabbed my journal and a pen and I just started writing because I had all the space. I had all the time. My kids were at home. We were not pregnant yet with our third. So they would play outside. We had a beautiful warm spring that spring, which is quite unusual for Munich, Germany. And so we were outside a ton. And it just came out of me sort of like wildfire of this concepts of grief from my own healing experience over the years prior. It was just, well, let me think about, how would I explain this to a client? And I would just sort of write it out. And I noticed more and more on Facebook, on my personal page with my friends and family, that they were just writing about how they were feeling during this pandemic. And I kept going like, guys, this is grief. Looking around like, is anybody seeing this as grief? But nobody was calling a spade a spade. And I was like, hey, grief, do you know? And they're like, oh my gosh, you're right. I am grieving. I didn't realize that. And from that, the ball kept rolling because I was like, let me look at what they're talking about, how they describe the suffering they're experiencing. And they'd use the word suffering. And then I'd ask a question like, what is it that causes the suffering? Well, I'm sad for a long period of time. Well, I'm angry and it feels like hopeless and there's no end in sight. And I said, don't you think the cavemen would laugh at us that we call that suffering versus a massive wound and like this lion coming after us. And I just thought, wow, we're very privileged to be in a different time where the word suffering has just this emotional context to it. I just don't want to feel sad for so long. And it does feel like suffering. But from that, the book sort of emerged this, how do we change this mindset of suffering into transformation? And transformation is not pretty. If we look at a butterfly, the metamorphosis process from caterpillar to butterfly, in the cocoon, it turns to mush. It's not this solid being anymore. In a sense, it's this mush. And then it starts to have these little platelets that form into the butterfly. So we have to go into the mush phase, and that's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to go from one state of being into another state of being, which helps us grow and change. And so I went kind of chapter by chapter of going, how is grief looked at in society? And what are the rules of grief that none of us chose to be a part of, but yet we hold ourselves to? And, how can we start to see grief differently? And then part 2, I honor, because I believe in honoring the history of things, I honor the phases of grief. Not everybody likes the phases or stages of grief, but I explain why they're here, why they came about for Dr. Kubler-Ross and all her research, how I still see them valid, and how we work with them, not by the book of them in a sense, it's this, and then point A goes to point B. That's not how they work. I explain them in real terms and what it feels like to have that anger and what it feels like to be in denial, which is what so many people are with hidden grief, right? And then the third part is the whole experience of grief. When we feel isolated, and yet often we're doing it to ourselves because grief is so subjective. Humor in grief, a tool for coping, and yet some of us feel uncomfortable doing it because we're like, oh, we shouldn't be laughing, or we should be miserable and sad all the time. I talk about gratitude in grief because I think grief actually teaches us really what gratitude looks like. The physical experiences in grief, because so many wrote to me about the physical pain and that shock that we get, and it can be for a variety of reasons, how it impacts our memory, how it impacts how exhausted we feel. Even the feeling of longing and nostalgia in a sense creates a physical feeling. And I talk about what is going on in our bodies when that happens. And so that part 3 is just me really going like, let's dive in to what's really happening. Let's dive into those people who think that they're helping and they're saying things that actually hurt us more than help. And how do we not be those people? Because often we are. When someone else is grieving, we tend to say the things that we think we're supposed to say. And actually, it's kind of foot and mouth. Maybe we shouldn't say those things. But then let's be empowered with what are some good things we could say? What are some ways we can support people in grief? So not to toot my own horn, but I'm a really big fan of the book because it is such a, my friends laugh at me all the time because sometimes I'll open up the book and I'll be like, whoa, that's really good. And they're like, you wrote that? I'm like, I know. But when you write a book, it's like staring at the tree and not seeing the forest. And when you put the forest in front of you, you're like, wow, this actually has some powerful moments, even for me as the writer, to go back and read. And I think all good self-help books, the writer would experience that we go back and go, oh, that's some good stuff to remind myself as well of how to work in my own grief or in my own work that I'm doing. And so the book came out of a time of removing urgency and seeing that the world was grieving. And it came quite quickly. It took a year in total to finish. And that's with getting pregnant with our fifth in total, but third baby to come into this world. And during a pandemic and a lot of ups and downs in life and trying to navigate all of that. But when you have an inspirational moment of this has to come out into the world, I don't think you can stop it. I don't think you can get in the way of it, right? And I had an amazing team of 2 women one did the cover. And if you go and look at The New Face of Grief on Amazon or any major bookstore, you'll see it has this beautiful lotus on it. It's very light color. It's quite different than the other grief books you're going to find. So it will stand out. And that was on purpose to start to show people there's a new face of grief. And my editor did an amazing job of really just pushing me to show the story to the readers instead of just telling you, hey, this is how this is. really giving examples, and my emotions are really in that book. You really get to see the experiences of what it was like to go through the losses I've gone through and some of the trauma that I've been through. And you get to see how I walked out on the other side going, okay, you can get through this. And together we decided to weave in stories of other women throughout the world, from Japan to Brazil to Europe to the States, who share their own grief stories and how they found meaning in what they experienced and why they know now that that had to happen so that they could become who they are today. So it's a powerful, I call it a journey book, basically, from beginning to end, of how you can start to do this too. It's not just to listen to my story and other women's stories. It's now here's your story and here's how you move forward.
I like that you've put a load of examples in it, because that's how I feel that people relate when they can read themselves in what you're saying or what somebody else has experienced. That's so valuable, because like you say, you can read till the cows come home, is an expression we use here. And it may not click, but when you read somebody and you recognize those emotions or those feelings, and you go, oh, that might just be me. And then it starts to take on a whole different power of its own, because suddenly you've clicked in and you've related to it, and takes you on this journey. So that's fantastic. And congratulations on just being courageous to sit down and commit to that and to get it out in the open and to do it in such a rounded way as what you've explained you've done. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
I wish you every success with that book. Once it gets out far and wide, people will start to understand that, yes, we need to look at it in a different way, which is exactly why I have this podcast.
Right. Yes.
Exactly. I want people to see that grief comes in so many different forms and shapes and sizes, and there's no one size fits all. So, and you take out of it what's right for you, where you are in your time. So just what are some things that can help us be resilient in our grief process?
Well, I think some things that can help us be resilient is, one is calling upon support. And that looks like people that are healthy and who are doing their own work. Sometimes those people are not in our circle right now. And so it might be that we find a community of people online, or we go and find that therapist or coach who can sit with us, and through them we meet others who can be with us. But we need to be reminded, we need to have a cheerleader on our side telling us, hey, it's there. We'll say the words until you say it internally yourself. You're capable. You can handle this. It's okay. It's a lot, but you can handle a lot. And I think having that constant reminder and that influence helps us to go, okay, the day doesn't feel good, but I know I've got that cheerleader on my side. I'm not alone. So it's reminding you you're not alone. I think that's step one in resiliency, is those reminders you're not alone. I think the second thing is, we do need a little bit of that reprieve. We need that respite. So if you go into your grief healing journey, it can get very heavy. And that's why I talk about humor in the book. Like, allow yourself to have those sunny days. Allow yourself that beautiful lotus to bloom. Allow those beautiful moments to remove the rule grief, or the rules around how you should show emotions or not. I talk about, everybody ugly cries, so we need to stop apologizing. Like, stop saying you're sorry for crying. Like, just cry. So allow yourself to express it, and you will feel resilient because you're no longer boxed in. Often we don't feel resilient. We don't feel like that bird that can fly. It's because we feel so caged by what everybody else is saying. And then the third is, we need the tools, and most of us weren't taught them. So whether you find my book and you use the tools that I put in there, you find something else that you feel really that you align with, you learn about guided meditations and you go through those for some healing, you go and do talk therapy, you go and do mind body work, you need to have tools. And that would be the other thing I would say, whoever you're working with, make sure they're not just keeping it all for themselves and kind of teaching you a little bit. They need to be going, okay, every week I want you doing this. Until I see you next time, I want this to be something you work on and try. And even if you only do it once, because until we start to make those habits happen, it's kind of like we leave them in the office. We leave it in that space for that session, and we don't make them a part of who we are. So it's important that you get a toolkit and learn how to use those on a regular basis with somebody who is safe to teach you those things.
Yeah, well, that takes us very, very nicely into my next question, which is it's actually about the natural resource that you've developed. 30 natural ways, that you can, what is it?
30 natural ways to support you in your
support
grief.
your grief. That's correct. And I love this because all being natural. We very rarely see this. And so take us through this, because I was excited when I read this list. And definitely there's some of my favorites on that list. So go for it.
So in my own personal work, I started researching teas that could support me. And I'm actually coming out this month with me and a tea specialist here in Munich, Germany. We have our own tea blend for grief support that's coming out. So I researched teas, I researched essential oils, even foods. What are the things that are going to support me in my grief? What are the habits? And there were like a good 30 that I can stand by and say, not just me, but other clients and friends and family have used. And we find these to be the most supportive. And I even write in there, like, when you're going through these particular things or this particular situation, that this tea or this oil or this food will really help. And I find it to be like, talk about toolkit. It's a free resource. So there you go with 30 ideas on that day when you're having a bad day and you're like, whoa, I feel it. And I'm so scared of my grief, or I'm so overwhelmed by it. What are some things I can do to sort of soothe that feeling? Because it's all a mental game. There they are. And I am not opposed to those who need to use medicine to help when it comes to depression and anxiety. But I often find we didn't know the tools prior that could support us before we jump into that. And I've been on the medications before as well. Had I known some of these things and tried them first, I sometimes wonder if I needed to be on the other things before. Yeah. So it's for me, it takes you doing the guesswork out. Like, let me go Google this. Let me see this. It's all there. It's all a good explanation of each thing. So it's not just like, drink this tea. It's like, but why? Why drink this tea? And what does it do to help your health? And how does it impact your mind?
I have a great naturopath herbalist that works out of a store. So you can just walk in and you can just say, I'm feeling blah, 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 blah. And she would go, okay, I think you need da, 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 da. And she puts it into a bottle, mixes it up, and away you go. And I tell you what, it is brilliant. I swear by it, because I'm not a great fan of medications. I went through years and years and years of that with, chronic illnesses. And so whenever I can go natural, that's the way I do it. And that's what I so love about your resource. It's got so many options, and they are good options. So thank you so much. And I'm going to share the link with that in the episode notes for our listeners, because it's a valuable resource, and I appreciate that. So before we just start to wind it down, I just want to understand about how personality types can affect our grief.
Oh, yes. I'm a huge fan of the Myers-Briggs type indicator. I have honestly, since I was 15, studying, learning, loved it, and learned it again, walking the talk. My mom and I were in therapy together during my parents' divorce because we had some issues back and forth. And we had to do the Myers-Briggs to learn about each other's personality types and how we were communicating ineffectively and not understanding, not seeing each other eye to eye. So from then on, I just have loved learning about it and teaching others about it. And in grief, what I found, especially with couples or even family members, is often when we have someone who's more of a thinker versus a feeler, that they struggle in their communication about the experience. And you might go, to someone who's more of a thinker and more sensing, like, you're not expressing your emotions. I don't know how you're feeling. You're not saying it. And then we think they're not grieving in healthy ways. and we place judgment on them. We place those rules, right? And whereas somebody who's a feeler, we might go, are you ever over it? Good Lord, you're talking about it all the time. You're like, crying constantly. And so then people get upset over that. So for me, it's really important to teach people about their personality types. And I also like to use human design. So I talk about their energy centers and things as well. I incorporate that in and allowing them to understand those people around them. Well, hey, if your partner is more this way, you're more extroverted, they're probably externally processing their thoughts and their feelings, and they are telling everybody. It feels like they're telling everybody their business, but it's how they process. And you as the introvert need to have that quiet time for you away, but remember that it's about solitude and not isolation. And as soon as you feel isolated, you come row your boat back to the mainland and say hello to everybody and go, I'm still here. I need your support. I'm a little too introverted right now, and so I think personality types and human design as well are such key components and a unique way that I deal with grief. I haven't found anyone else who combines the two of helping you understand tools for your grief that are unique to you, how to better communicate with those around you, and then also how to process your grief. Because if I talk with a thinker about processing grief, it's very different than if I talk with a feeler.
So important to understand those traits. And I'm definitely one of those introverts that needs to row my boat to shore and reconnect with people, because I can so be on my own for so long. And I know, okay, time for some socialization. I love it. So what is the best thing that's happened to you either today or this past week?
Oh, we celebrated Halloween, and it was our first Halloween party. Usually Halloween falls on a weekday, and this year it fell on a 3-day weekend. So we had a huge Halloween party. So that's I would say the best thing recently, because we love to celebrate in our family. We love to have people around and have parties. And it was such a treat for our girls to be able to do that and have our third have her first Halloween. It was just a lot of fun to dress up. So that was really special for us.
Oh, that's so lovely. And what is the proudest moment in your life today?
Releasing this book on the 3rd anniversary of my mom's death, and looking at that day and knowing that it had a lot of emotions of loss and gratitude that this book was there, and a legacy piece of her life, a legacy piece for me. My children will have this to look back on. So yeah, I would say that's it.
That's beautiful. And I feel that really strong connection there, releasing it on her anniversary date. I bet she was right on that journey, 100% with you. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
And when you have moments in your day that we have this expression turns to custard, but, when you have moments that are really not going well for you, how do you pivot out of them?
Music.
Mm-hmm.
I blast positive music because I know that I'm the type where if I take in negative music that feeds into the emotions I'm having, it just keeps me there. So if I have upbeat dancing music, praise music, anything that just gets me out of my head and just experiencing the music itself, that pulls me out.
Beautiful. And what takeaways would you like to leave our listeners with?
I think the biggest one is the reminder I said that the book will give you too, is you're more than capable of handling what you've experienced in life. You've already experienced it. That's the key with hidden grief, right? You've already experienced all the things. Now it's just healing from them. So the worst part is over. We always say like, no, well, then I have to feel it again and think about it again. And but you've already experienced it. It's done. Now it's the healing part. And you are more than capable of handling that. And deep inside you is this strong resiliency that just needs to be reminded and cultivated that it's there. And it's like a plant. We put the seeds in the soil and we water it. We make sure it's by the sun. And we don't just leave it there. We continue to water it, even though we don't see the plant that's growing or the roots that's developing. It's the same with grief work. Give it time. You do the work daily and you will see the growth that comes from it. You just have to believe in it. I think that's the key piece.
Oh, that's beautiful. And for people who are interested in getting your book, a copy of your book, or taking a look at what you do further, the resources that are available, how do they go about doing that? I'm going to have them in the episode notes, but yeah.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So the New Face of Grief is on Amazon and on all major online bookstores. So you just search for it. And this is the beauty of print on demand. You can be anywhere in the world and find it. And you also can find the website. It's thenewfaceofgrief.com, or go to my website, katierossler.com, and you'll find info on the book there as well.
Beautiful. Katie, what a wonderful conversation that I've had with you today. I just love your energy. I love the way you think about grief from so many different angles and how you incorporate so much into it. It feels really holistic to me. It feels like you've captured, grief in a great, big, beautiful way that, when we are able to, relate it to ourselves and connect to it, that we can move through it. So thank you so much for sharing so much wonderful information with our listeners today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. I hope you got some real value from this episode. Let me know how I'm doing, or if there's a topic you'd like covered, by clicking on the Healing to Be You Gmail link, or going to the Healing to Be You website. To get notified of new episodes, hit the subscribe button, and please share if you know of someone who could benefit from this episode. Until next time, be kind to you and take good care.